Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about private military companies. Now, at the start of the Ukraine war, private military companies became headline news all around the world because it transpired that Russia was using a private company called Wagner that was led by a high-profile Russian individual called Yevgeny Prigozhin. And Wagner had 50,000 mercenaries that were being used as the spearhead of the Russian attack in Ukraine. These guys were being put on the front line and lots of them were losing their lives. And there was a really interesting turn of events when Yevgeny Prigozhin decided to turn the Wagner troops around and reportedly was thinking about starting a civil war in Russia. And as a result of that, Wagner was disbanded and Yevgeny Prigozhin unfortunately lost his life in a plane crash. But private military companies are now back on the agenda in Russia, and the Russian parliament has recently approved Novatek, one of the biggest gas companies in Russia, to set up its own private army. And surprisingly, this isn't the first company that have been authorized to set up its own army. So in today's video, we'll go through the concept of private military companies and talk about whether or not this is a legal thing in any country around the world. We'll then talk about what's gone on in Russia in terms of the development of private military companies. We'll talk about what's going on with regards to the energy companies who've now been given the green light to set up their own armies. We'll then go on to talk about why Russia is doing this, because Russia recently came out and said that it was going to defend all of the oil and gas facilities, but clearly that isn't sufficient, and they're now having to get these companies to set up their own armies. And of course, the reason for this is because of the drone attacks that are currently taking place by Ukraine. Over the last couple of months, Ukraine has changed its tactics away from simply defending itself against Russia to going on the offensive, and it's now flying hundreds of drones which are targeting oil and gas facilities in Russia. And this is now causing major problems for both Russian industry and also Russian income. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is going on here, why Russia has authorized these companies to set up their own armies, what the risks are, and what the potential impact of all of this is on the Russian economy. But before we get started, I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone who's supporting the channel, particularly over the last few weeks when it's been a pretty hard period for me. As I'm sure you'll be aware, I lost the channel for 5 days to crypto hackers who put up some nonsense videos talking about some crypto in an effort to try to scam money out of you guys. And during that period, I was hit with a wave of generosity and support, and I really appreciate all of that. So if you've sent me a YouTube super thanks or bought me a coffee recently, thank you so much for the time and effort that you've taken to do that. Really appreciate it. And if you've signed up as a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or YouTube membership or Buy Me a Coffee membership, I really appreciate that long-term support. It keeps me motivated. It keeps me making more videos like this. So thank you. Now, before we dive into the detail on private military companies, I wanted to talk to you about today's sponsor, NordVPN, who are offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive deal. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that I've got personal experience of exposing data to tracking, hacking, and malicious activity because my channel was recently hacked. And I want to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. By using NordVPN, you protect your data, your passwords, and your accounts from all of those types of activity. If you want to make sure that you're fully protected every single time that you go onto the internet, then you need to be using a VPN and make sure that it's switched on and don't switch it off. Don't override it in the same way that I did when I got hit with my scam. But the great thing about VPNs is that they're not just there to protect you, they also open up a whole world of entertainment and information. Every time I'm researching a story, I'm looking at articles all around the world. And quite often I'm blocked from accessing those articles because I'm officially in the wrong geographic location. However, by using a VPN, you can change your location and access data and also TV shows, movies, and sports matches that are not available in your region. And the great news is that NordVPN is offering an exclusive deal to Joe Blogs viewers which you can access by clicking on the link in the description below, which is showing on the screen now. And NordVPN comes with a no-risk 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get your money back at any point in the first 30 days if you're not happy with the service. A private military company is a company that's been set up for financial gain, so to make a profit, that can provide a variety of different offerings, from security services right through to armed combat. And in terms of who uses these services, there are two different ends of the spectrum. At the very basic end, companies that are setting up facilities in what are considered to be politically unstable or dangerous countries may want to use private military companies to help with their security. So a good example of this is oil and gas companies that are setting up drilling facilities in countries in Africa or the Middle East that are politically unstable and where they are potentially liable to some form of attack. So those companies will hire a separate company to cover all of their security needs. And that private military company will provide personnel who may be armed. They may have guns and armoured vehicles and various other sorts of weapons that they can defend the facilities against attack. And those people will then patrol the perimeter, set up all of the security, all of the cameras, and manage everything on a private basis. So basically, if you're the oil and gas company, you're outsourcing all of your security to somebody else to make sure that your personnel and your facilities are safe. So that's at the very basic end of this spectrum. At the very other end of the spectrum, you've got companies that have been set up to help with military conflict. And a good example of this is the Wagner Group that I mentioned right at the start of today's video, which was set up by the Russian entrepreneur Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's a former chef, and he hired reportedly up to 50,000 mercenaries, and mercenaries are generally ex-soldiers who then sign up and are paid to go and join a fight somewhere around the world. And the Wagner Group was sent into Ukraine alongside Russian forces to try to take over all of that territory. But the key difference is that the Wagner employees were being paid by Wagner. They're not employed by Russia, they're not Russian soldiers, and therefore they don't fall under the same rules and regulations as soldiers would in terms of being part of the army. So they're the two different ends of this spectrum, and obviously there's a massive grey area in the middle. And private military companies are big business. It's estimated that they're paid around $100 billion every single year to provide these security services. And I guess you're sitting there thinking, well, surely this can't be legal. Surely a mercenary is illegal anywhere in the world. And you'd be wrong if you were thinking that, because although in 1989 there was a convention that did make the hiring of mercenaries illegal in warfare, actually only 35 countries signed up to that convention, and the USA and the UK did not sign up. So they haven't signed the agreement, and therefore it isn't technically illegal to be a mercenary. Now, in terms of what that mercenary can do, obviously you can't hire a private military company to go out and kill a lot of people where you live. That wouldn't be legal, because it then crosses over the boundary in terms of what's legal and illegal in your country. So it may actually be legal to hire the private company, but it isn't legal to instruct them to then go and murder people. And obviously the people who are doing the murdering would also be accountable. So you may also be asking, well, who's actually providing these services? Who are these companies? I've only ever heard of Wagner. Well, you may be surprised to hear that there are lots of these companies set up in the UK and the USA and various other countries around the world. But most of these companies actually focus on defence and security, so actually looking after your facilities. This table shows some of the private military companies currently active in the United Kingdom, and reveals that one of the largest businesses, Aegis Defence Systems, was contracted by the US Department of Defense during the most recent war in Iraq, and the company has also provided security services in Afghanistan. And this table shows some of the private military companies currently active in the USA. So the majority of private military companies around the world are actually providing security services, protecting individuals and facilities in dangerous countries around the world. They're not actually providing mercenaries to go in and join the fight in some sort of war. However, let's have a look at the situation with regards to what's happening in Russia. Private military companies in Russia are predominantly focused on combat rather than defence and security. These are ex-forces who have experience in warfare and are hired to join forces in wars all across the world. The first recorded Russian PMC was an outfit called ENOT, which is Russian for raccoon, which was founded in 2011. ENOT was predominantly used in military conflict in the Donbass region of Ukraine. Before the Ukraine war actually started, these guys went in and supported Russians in their conflict against Ukraine that was going on in the region. However, ENOT was disbanded in 2019 after accusations from the Russian state that they were hiring children into the forces, and since that time many of the senior officials in ENOT have been arrested. Another reported private military company that doesn't have that official status is a motorcycle gang based in Russia called the Night Wolves. In 2011, President Putin was seen riding alongside the Night Wolves at a biker festival in Russia. And in 2013, President Putin issued the Russian Medal of Honor to the leader of the Night Wolves, who's known as the Surgeon. The Night Wolves have around 7,000 members and were reportedly involved in the annexation of Crimea back in 2014 and have subsequently been sanctioned by both the USA and the European Union. As we've already discussed in today's video, the largest of all of the private military companies in Russia was the Wagner Group, which was established in 2014 by Yevgeny Prigozhin. And what's interesting about Wagner is that they were deployed by Russia in a variety of countries all around the world, not just to help with Russia in its fights, but to have some political influence in countries where there was instability and fighting and civil war. This map details Russia's use of private military companies, predominantly Wagner, worldwide, dating back to 2014. And what this shows is that in 2014, Wagner were used in Ukraine, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Senegal. The following year, Russia deployed Wagner troops in Libya and Syria. And over the last 8 years, mercenaries from private military companies have been used in Egypt, Sudan, Chad, South Sudan, Central African Republic, the Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Mali, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Madagascar, Yemen, Iraq, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Venezuela. So what we can see here is a very different use of private military companies by Russia. These are not being used predominantly for security purposes to defend Russian nationals and Russian facilities. These are being used to go into warfare and conflict situations to help develop Russia's political gains. As we discussed right at the start of today's video, the Russian parliament has now approved Novatek to hire its own private army to defend all of its facilities. And this becomes the fourth company in Russia that has had this sort of approval, following on from Gazprom, the largest gas business, Rosneft, which is the largest oil business, and Transneft, which is the company that owns a lot of the pipelines in Russia. So what we've got here is an approval for these companies to go out and hire mercenaries to do whatever they need to do to defend their facilities. Now, clearly at the moment, the main threat is coming from Ukrainian drones. And these guys are going to have to set up some sort of system to try to take those drones out. And as we've discussed in other videos, that's actually going to be very difficult because these drones are very small and they don't really have a lot of heat. So in terms of heat-seeking missiles or something that would show up on a radar, it's very difficult to be able to spot them. And I think the announcement that the Russian parliament has approved all of these companies to set up their own armies is really interesting, because Russia recently stated that it was going to defend all of the oil and gas facilities using its missiles. So why have they done this? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, there's the financial implications, because if Russia has to provide all of the defence for all of these facilities, obviously the state would have to pay for that. And at the moment, Russia is sending most of its financial support directly to Ukraine. The budget that was announced for 2024 showed a huge increase in defence spending. It now represents around 30% of all of Russia's spending, and that's at the expense of things like healthcare and education. Russia is focusing predominantly on Ukraine rather than developing its own economy. So to provide more defence facilities for all of these different companies would obviously increase that budget further, and this isn't something that Russia have included in those numbers. So by allowing these companies to set up their own private defence forces, that means that they would have to pay for them, so the state doesn't have to foot the bill. But the other issue, I think, from Russia's point of view, is that they're also devoting all of their military power to what's happening in Ukraine. So Russia has sent all of its missile systems and defence weaponry into Ukraine, so it doesn't really have a lot left in the arsenal to start going around and setting up local facilities for all of these oil and gas plants. And as we've talked about before, there are 44 mega refineries in Russia, but there's actually a lot more smaller ones as well. So we're talking about hundreds of different sites that Russia would now have to start defending. And this is going to be complicated and expensive from the Russian state's point of view. So by letting these companies set up their own defence systems, it gets them off the hook. It means that they don't have to, firstly, foot the bill, and secondly, send a lot of people that they want to send to Ukraine. And let's not forget that Russia did a mobilization at the end of 2022 because it was short of people. So the last thing that it wants to do is take soldiers out of Ukraine to go and defend all of these facilities. So Russia simply doesn't have the money or the people to be able to do it. So that's one of the reasons why they've signed off on this. But I guess the risk from Russia's point of view is that allowing private armies to build up is a major risk from a political perspective. Because as we saw with Yevgeny Prigozhin, once you've got an army of 50,000 people working for you, it can change your perspective. And if you're not happy with what's going on in Russia, you can do something about it. And that's what he tried to do when he tried to launch his civil war. Now, unfortunately, that didn't work out very well for him, and he ended up dying in a plane crash. Now, one other interesting private military company that I wanted to mention at this point is a company called Fakel, which was set up by Gazprom. Now, interestingly, Fakel hasn't been set up to provide security services for Gazprom facilities, but rather is a combat unit similar to Wagner that's actually fighting in Ukraine that is using Gazprom employees. So basically, these are volunteers who currently are employed by Gazprom. So these guys previously had jobs in the gas and oil industry. They've signed up to go and fight in Ukraine, and they're doing so under this employment of Fakel. So they're still being paid by Gazprom, but they're fighting in Ukraine. And what they've been told is that their jobs are guaranteed upon return to Russia. So a slightly different setup. This isn't a defense system. This is a combat unit using employees from the oil and gas industry. And once again, this is similar to Wagner, and that has the associated issues with regards to building a private army. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with regards to the drone attacks that are being sent by Ukraine on a daily basis against all of the Russian oil and gas facilities is one of the biggest issues that's come out of the Ukraine war in the last 12 months. This change of tactic by Ukraine is really starting to make Russia think about the devastating impact that these drone strikes can have on the Russian economy and therefore on Russia's ability to sustain this war for the long term. Because Russia has a constant need for billions of dollars to keep the war in Ukraine going. And if that income is cut off at source by damaging all of these facilities, then that's going to really impair Russia's ability to keep going. So what we're seeing is a change in tactics, and this is now causing Russia to have to think about how it's going to defend itself. And what we've seen in today's video is that the Russian state has turned around to all of the major oil and gas companies and said, you now have the right to set up your own army. We don't really have the resources or the personnel to be able to defend all of your facilities because, firstly, there's so many of them, and secondly, it's really difficult to be able to defend them because these drones are coming in very fast and they're really small and therefore difficult to intercept. So they've passed the buck over to all of those companies. And those companies obviously have a lot of cash, and they can now start hiring mercenaries to go and defend all of their facilities. But the problem that you have when you do that, when you empower a company to set up its own army, there are always inherent risks because, as we saw with Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner troops, when you get to the point where you start thinking that you're making better decisions than somebody who's running the country, you suddenly realise that you can do something about it. And that's what he did when he tried to start his civil war. Now, obviously, that was entirely unsuccessful. And anybody else who was thinking about doing that would really have to sit down and think about whether they wanted to do that, because the repercussions of failing with a civil war in Russia are potentially fatal. But what we're seeing is these companies are allowed now to set up their own armies. Now, they may be able to improve the defence. They may be able to start intercepting more of these drones. But as I reported in a recent video, Ukraine thinks that it's able to produce 2 million drones in 2024. And the European Union has committed to providing another 1 million drones over the next 12 months. So Ukraine will have around 3 million drones this year. Now, not all of them are long-range attack drones. Some of them will be the helicopter-style ones for surveillance. But there will definitely be a massive increase in the number of explosive drones that can attack these facilities. So over the next 6 to 12 months, it's likely that we'll see a huge increase in the number of attacks on those oil and gas facilities. And only a very small number needs to get through to cause chaos in the Russian oil and gas industry. And I guess one of the other reasons why the Russian state has handed control of the defence over to these companies is that it won't be accountable. Those companies now have to look after themselves. And if they get hit, then it isn't the Russian state who are to blame. It will be the private companies that they've set up who are defending their facilities. But the overall summary of today's video is what we are seeing is Russia is now realising that these drone attacks could cause major problems for both the oil and gas industry and then ultimately the income that those companies are earning, and therefore the income that the Russian state is receiving from all of the taxes that they're paid by those companies. If that happens, if Russia was to lose a huge amount of its income, that's going to cause Russia major problems in terms of continuing the war in Ukraine. What we've seen in today's video is that those companies are now being encouraged to improve their defence systems. Whether or not they'll be able to do that is a major question, because it is really difficult to defend against these drone attacks. And it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, you simply won't be able to stop all of them. And if we do see the huge increase in drones that Ukraine is talking about in 2024, it's likely that more of these facilities will get taken down. At the moment, around 15% of the Russian oil output has been affected, and that's only been in a couple of months with a few hundred drones. If we do see millions of drones being sent into Russian territory, it could wipe out 50, 60, 70, 80 or 90% of the Russian oil and gas industry, and that would have a devastating impact not just on the industry, but on Russia, its finances and its ability to continue the war in Ukraine. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.